What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talk or subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, yesterday we talked to DK Metcalf. Well, everybody but me talked to DK Metcalf, Darius Slay, all of the newcomers thus far. The Steelers signed Mason Rudolph. Aaron Rodgers watch continues. Mike Florio's got a new and, well, very interesting name for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're diving into where they could find plan B because there has to be one. And I don't believe it's Russell Wilson, no matter how much some people pound the horse that it is Russell Wilson. And then we'll dive into wide receiver talk on Cooper Kupp and his price tag. Who's favored to land the former Los Angeles Rams wide receiver, and why it might mean that George Pickens is on his way out, but also at the same time why the Pittsburgh Steelers might not be done adding wide receivers this offseason. Nick, it's been a beautiful one here in the Berg. I am glad to be inside. I'll give everybody a little rundown of how yesterday went because we were live on the podcast trying to time it perfectly because at some point I had to give up and say, I'm done waiting. I am going to do this podcast. The second that we started, Darius Slay and DK Metcalf did their press conferences. I walked back in, had to make sure that I, said, what's up to DK. So I walked up, shook his hand, said, I'm Noah Strackbine. I'm so sorry. I was doing a podcast. He said, I'm DK. And then we went our separate ways. Wasn't the media day I thought I was going to have, but it was still a good one. And I appreciate everybody sticking through us as I stood in a parking lot yesterday and did a pretty fun podcast, I would say. How you feeling, my friend? I'm glad to be back sitting in a chair today.
I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm glad to see you didn't get sunburnt yesterday because it was bright and sunny for that 45 minutes that we were live on YouTube yesterday. But no, I mean, hey, it's a first impression. It's certainly going to set you apart from the other writers saying, yeah, I'm the guy that was not here during your introductory press conference. I'm the guy that instead decided to go out into the parking lot and talk to the masses. So what I will say, main takeaway, nobody can ever question your faith and your loyalty to our listeners in our chat because you were there instead of meeting the Steelers' new superstar wide receiver.
Every time I would do it every single time. I'd much rather, I love my job and everything I do, but this is what gets me through the day. You know what I mean? When I'm tired, I'm exhausted. I won't lie to you. I'm running on fumes. You can ask anybody who's either texted me, anybody who works with us, who has been messaging us in the Slack. Like my sentences are starting to make zero sense. I'm out here just spewing words, trying to get through this show, man. It's the juice. It's the coffee I need. I was running on high for 48 hours from the call-in show, and then this morning I'm like, all right, we're good. We're good again. We're back. And the morning shows give me some life. So appreciate everybody who was sticking through us yesterday. Let's recap a little bit of what's going on. Mason Rudolph signed a 2-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's a lot of questions about whether or not that means he's plan B for the Steelers if they are not going to end up with Aaron Rodgers, who at this point has left them completely in the dark. There are no conversations being had. Diana Rossini is saying maybe the Minnesota Vikings are emerging as a team that could come in here and land Aaron Rodgers last second, take him away from both the Steelers and the New York Giants and put him in front of J.J. McCarthy. And Aaron's actually contemplating waiting and seeing if the Minnesota Vikings do make that offer. Now, we'll start with this one. That's an easy call for Aaron Rodgers, and I understand that all Steelers fans would be pissed. I understand that the Steelers would be pissed. But if you're Aaron Rodgers and thinking of it through the Aaron Rodgers lens, the Minnesota Vikings make the most sense. I mean, look what they just did with Sam Darnold. You have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. You just rebuilt your offensive line. You got Brian Flores, calling the defense, and it's a damn good defense. I mean, you just went 14-3. It's the easiest call Aaron Rodgers could make to finish off his career. What does that mean for the Steelers? I think that's the biggest question. Is this going to draw out for a week because the Minnesota Vikings have to decide if Aaron Rodgers is their guy, is going to be the starter over JJ, who lost 4 or 5 months of development, who I was watching Albert Breer talk yesterday on the Breer Report, and he was saying that he's down significant weight because of the rehab and the loss of playing time and so on and so forth. So you have to take that into account. Like, are the Minnesota Vikings actually considering a change? Is that something that they would actually look into? And if it does, like, how long are the Steelers willing to wait and sit here and say, we will wait it out for Aaron Rodgers? This is my guess. And then we'll dive into the plan Bs. My guess is the Pittsburgh Steelers are willing to wait long enough before the next quarterback that they had on their list is signed outside of Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson does not count. I think Russell Wilson and the Steelers are, they understand that they are last resort here, but they are a resort and they are a plan, a name on the list. It might be pretty far down the pecking order, but it is a name on the list. He does not count. But the second that a Carson Wentz gets signed, and I'm not saying these are names on the Steelers' big board. I'm just saying that these are candidates if the Steelers really have to get desperate at some point this offseason. But the second that a Carson Wentz gets signed, a second that a Jameis Winston gets signed, one of those middle tier, yikes, but you could kind of in a wild fantasy see it happen and name, one of those gets signed. That's when I think the Steelers say, all right, we're done. We're done. We're going to get our guy. It's not Aaron Rodgers. It's not Justin Fields. It's not Sam Darnold. It might not even be Russell Wilson. Maybe it is Russell Wilson. But the second one of them gets signed, they say, we're done waiting, Aaron. Sorry, buddy. We just can't do this any longer. I don't know when that happens. I don't expect it to happen soon. Like, I could see like a Trey Lance getting inked to a deal. He doesn't count. He's not coming to the Steelers to start in 2025. We're talking real, actual, like, on a really bad situation, which is what the Steelers have. You could be a starting quarterback. Those guys, once one of those gets signed, I think that's when the Steelers start to say, all right, let's go. Like, it's time. We'll give you 24 hours. You have 24 hours. You got to give us a decision. I would imagine that makes Aaron join the Steelers, but you never know. Do you have a guess on when the Steelers look at this and say, look at, dude, we're done. Line in the sand. We're moving on. Let's go on.
No, I said yesterday that I think they're on Rodgers' time, and I think I hold true to that. I think they're going to sit and wait for Rodgers to have his say and pick where he wants to go, simply because they got their contingency plan yesterday. They signed Mason Rudolph, and I think that they are truly okay that if Rodgers walks, they will get Rudolph, and I think they will go. I mean, my personal opinion is I think they'll go into the draft and they'll take a mid-round rookie and say those two can, him and Skylar Thompson can battle it out for that number 2 position. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers are, from the outside, it feels like that's what they're going to look at. They're going to say, listen, we're going to wait out for Rodgers because we think that's where the highest ceiling is. And if he doesn't go, if he doesn't come to Pittsburgh, it feels like yesterday is the day that they said, that's what we were wanting to do, is sign our contingency plan. And now they can sit and wait. Now that they can sit and say, we've gotten most of our big fish for this offseason. Yeah, it'd be nice if they could sign one more, but they've gotten most of the big names. They've gotten in DK. They've gotten in, Darius Slay. They filled in some positions on the defensive side of the football. It feels like they're going to wait. It feels like they're going to be on Aaron Rodgers' time. And I understand there's people that are saying he should have already had this decision made. But it feels to me that even though this is a guy that likes to stretch out all of his decisions, it's not going to take another 2 weeks. If anything, I think it would take, another couple of days. I might be wrong, because
I was going to say, like, what's the surprise?
He's Aaron Rodgers, and you can't peg him down. But
exactly, what's the surprise? Like, what's your surprise level if it's 2 weeks? If we show up here next Friday and Aaron Rodgers still doesn't have a deal, what's your surprise? 1 to 10. What's your surprise level?
Surprise level there would still probably be a 4, because the decisions are clear. I understand they're not easy decisions, but it's not like he has 80,000 of them. Play, yes. If the Vikings are in, that's where I go. Play, yes. Vikings are out. Steelers are where I go. It's not a lot that's on his plate. The biggest decision is whether or not he wants to play. And I think that's a decision that he should come to before, 2 weeks pass and we're into April.
I agree. I think it's wild, but at the same time, I just don't know. Like I said it yesterday, I went on a whole rant of like how running on Aaron Rodgers time is wild, and it really is the enigma. And it's just you have no idea what's going to happen next. You don't know. It's not an Antonio Brown roller coaster. It's not a George Pickens or Mike Tomlin or any of these that we've ever been through before. This is a completely different situation, and honestly, I think we're all navigating it the same. But I agree. It's you think it would come down to two calls. Am I playing football? Am I going to the Vikings or am I going to the Steelers? When those calls get made, I think that's the massive question. So if they don't, Mason Rudolph is a plan. He's already on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Two insiders, Mike Florio and Jerry Dulac, dropped a couple of names that could also be on the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll start with Mike Florio's because it's wild. I mean, does it surprise you? But it's wild. And all respect to Mike Florio, but he said pretty certainly, to be honest, that if Aaron Rodgers is not coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers, you want to know who is? Jameis Winston. Because he could sling the rock to both George Pickens and DK Metcalf. He's exactly what you need for those guys. That's what he said. And he, again, said it with such certainty that is the move after Aaron Rodgers. Meanwhile, Jerry Dulac named two rookie quarterbacks who could be on the horizon here, Jackson Dart and Will Howard. We'll toss two more in there, Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe, because we know the Steelers have interest to those as well. We'll start with Jameis Winston. What? That's my biggest response. How did we get here? Jameis Winston would be cool. He'd be fun. We've joked about him in the past. I love Jameis. I think he's hilarious. I don't think he's the worst quarterback in the world. I definitely don't. But if we're going to be very honest, Mason Rudolph probably wins you a Super Bowl before Jameis Winston does. If you gave it 100 tries, I would imagine that even in the grand, somehow it doesn't come down to Mason winning the Super Bowl. It comes down to you could already visualize Jameis throwing the interception in the Super Bowl that costs you the Super Bowl. Yeah. Mason at least isn't going to do that. Mason will bare minimum you as far as you could possibly carry him. Jameis is going to carry you as far as Jameis can carry you. The Steelers are aware of this. They're not. Mike Tomlin did not allow Russell Wilson to call plays at the line of scrimmage, did not tell Justin Fields to do literally nothing but throw it to George Pickens or run the football conservatively, and controlled every aspect of Kenny Pickett for 2 years just to say Jameis is the guy. That's the one we're going to let loose. That's the guy that we're making the change here. It doesn't follow the philosophy at all of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mason Rudolph does a little bit, but Jameis does not. But at the same time, in Florio's defense here, I mean, Aaron Rodgers is not a Steelers quarterback at all. A Steelers quarterback. And Mike Tomlin has said, screw it. We just got to try and figure this thing out. Maybe Jameis is a name that's bigger than Mason Rudolph's and maybe comes in here as a plan B. Do you see it at all? We've talked about Jameis before, but I'm telling you with such certainty, Mike Florio said Jameis Winston's name. And you got to ask, do you think there's some truth to that?
I mean, that is an example of say anything with enough confidence and some people will believe it. No,
100%.
I don't think the Pittsburgh Steelers would look into Jameis Winston. And you said, maybe they're opening up. Maybe Mike Tomlin is saying we have to kind of change things up because he's going after Aaron Rodgers. It is mighty different going after a guy who is a 4-time MVP. And one of those times was as frequently as 3 years ago. And saying maybe he has one last ride left in the tank, and going with a guy who averages the same amount of interceptions that he has touchdowns. Now, in that record, he also does throw a lot of touchdowns. He does throw for a lot of yards. Let's not forget that he put Jerry Jeudy on the map as one of the top 5 wide receivers in the game for several weeks throughout last season. That's who Jameis Winston can be at his best. At his worst, your defense is going to look over to the other side of the ball and say, I don't think we even want to play. Can we just put up the 7 for the other team? Because we're out there the entire 60-minute game. So
yes.
I don't think the Steelers would go for Jameis Winston. It just doesn't fit with what they have done to this point in the offseason. That feels like a move that you make when you're saying, hey, we just need guys to fill out the quarterback room. The Steelers are trying to find an answer. And the fact that they already brought in Skylar Thompson on the first day of the entire offseason, they already brought in Mason Rudolph, and they've shown so much interest in this rookie quarterback class. Whether you like it or not, they've shown the interest. It feels to me that going after Jameis just doesn't quite fit everything that we've seen from them throughout this offseason so far.
I agree. And to be honest with you, like I agree, but I also disagree because everything they've done this offseason is so anti what the Steelers do that it just doesn't make any sense. But I agree with you that it's not a move that the Steelers do. Like it doesn't tie into anything that the Steelers philosophy says it would, or that Mike Tomlin's go-to says that it would. Like that's not a Mike Tomlin Pittsburgh Steelers Art Rooney Omar Khan move. Like there's nobody out there in the Pittsburgh Steelers organization that you say, oh, that he would do that, because you could look at all the rest of them and it makes sense. Aaron Rodgers, that's a Mike Tomlin move all day. That's a Mike Tomlin move. That he probably sent him the gif of him and Rodgers just smiling at each other, saying, come on, buddy. You want to come to Pittsburgh. You want to come to Pittsburgh. DK Metcalf. That's Omar Khan ready to make a splash, but also Mike Tomlin drooling at the idea of DK Metcalf. Mm-hmm. That's a move, keeping Arthur Smith, drafting Kenny Pickett, hiring Matt Canada. Art Rooney moves. Spot, you know what I mean? That's Pittsburgh blood right there. That's how we do these things. Keeping Najee Harris the starter all season long. Art Rooney / Mike Tomlin move. Jameis Winston fits none of these. Not a single one. Mason Rudolph fits the Art Rooney Omar Khan side of things. I think maybe Mike Tomlin, but you got to think maybe they hate each other. I have no idea.
Come on now. I mean, Mike Tomlin turned to him at the end of 2023 and gave him a playoff game. He went with him over a healthy Kenny Pickett.
I agree. That has to earn
some brownie points in Mason's eyes. And he came back, so you can't hate the head coach if you're coming back for a third time.
I agree. And I love Mason. I think Mason's a great dude. But I mean, was that a big enough bone to say you've disrespected me so many times in the last 3 years that, I don't know. Maybe. You might be right. You're not going to re-sign with the team for 2 years saying, I hate this place. There's got to be something there. And maybe Mason's turn of the tide is as strong as the fan base's turn of the tide towards him, because, he is a local hero in the city of Pittsburgh right now. That is what he currently is, possibly saving their quarterback position. But again, Winston doesn't fit a single one of those moves. He doesn't. There's just nobody that makes sense to pound the table for a Jameis Winston. Mason Rudolph, yes. The other ones here are rookie quarterbacks, Jackson Dart, Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, and Jalen Milroe. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And if any of them are available in the third round, I could see it. I don't see the Steelers at this point doing something drastic. I don't know if, this is what Dulac said on the Rich Eisen show. This is the scenario he laid it out. We'll try to, piece it together to make sense here. That he could see a wide receiver, that he expects a wide receiver before the fourth round or by the fourth round in the NFL draft, opening the door for a George Pickens trade later in the offseason, because that probably makes the most sense. He also sees a third round quarterback in either Jackson Dart, Will Howard. We could, again, add Ewers or Milroe there. That leaves you with two situations here. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're waiting till the fifth round to draft a running back, which maybe they're showing their cards here because they're bringing guys like Dylan Sampson in, who's a fifth round running back, for a top 30 visit. Or you're going running back in the first round and you're avoiding a defensive tackle. That one doesn't make any sense to me. I'll kind of toss a curveball at you, but I do want your thoughts on the quarterback in the draft in the third round. If that's a realistic in your eyes, that's where we're headed right now. If it is, I want to know. And at the same time, are you starting to visualize the idea of the Pittsburgh Steelers actually moving back to add a second round pick that's at 21?
I don't see that happening. I don't. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are a team that right now, while they do have multiple needs and they probably would like to draft a quarterback, a running back, and a defensive tackle in the first 3 rounds, and they just don't have that draft capital. I don't think they're in a position where they can trade out of 21 and say, you know what, to get all 3 of those positions filled, to get those boxes checked, we're going to sacrifice potentially bringing in a guy that could immediately become a 10-year starter. And I think that's what I see out of Kenneth Grant. That's what I see potentially out of Walter Nolan to a lesser extent. And I just don't think the Steelers are in a position to do that right now. It just doesn't make that much sense to me for them to be able to do that. Now, as far as the quarterback in the 3rd round, I don't think anybody's going to be able to sit here definitively until that happens in late April. I don't think anybody's going to be able to sit here definitively and say that they are leaning one way or another, simply because there's volatility in who's going to be available at both positions.
Yes.
You mentioned Jackson Dart. He could go as high as the 1st round. Jalen Milroe as well. Will Howard, who knows? He has a good pro day and people start remembering, oh, this is the guy that just won a national championship and clinched it on a 3rd and 11 with a deep ball to Jeremiah Smith. Maybe he starts climbing up the board into the 2nd round. And if that's the case, all of a sudden you're looking around and you're saying, all right, we have to be ready to go running back because the quarterbacks we wanted aren't here. And I think 3rd round is probably, I know everybody's falling in love with Tyler Shuck. I think that right now that's still a little bit high of an evaluation for a guy like Shuck. I still think that he is 5th round, 4th round at most, as most projections are kind of calling it. So right now, I think that, you can pinpoint the 3rd round is going to be between one of 2 positions. And if not, then it'd be a massive surprise. But I don't think you can lean one way or the other between running back and quarterback in the 3rd round right now. And as far as running back in the 1st round, man, I personally hope not. Najee was consistent and as good as he could have been considering the circumstances that he came in with.
Yeah.
But spending the 20th overall pick on a guy that's gone 4 years later and no playoff wins to your name because of it, I can't see them going down the same road again. But again, you never know with the Steelers organization.
No, you never do. And I wouldn't rule out a 1st round running back. I certainly wouldn't rule out a 1st round running back. Again, I'm with you on the boat of I don't know if I support it. I think, the PTSD of Najee tied in with just the short lifespan of an NFL running back and how you might get him for 2 contracts, but how many of those guys really last a full 2 contracts on one team? Very few out here. Whereas a defensive tackle could spend his entire career in one place. Cam Hayward and TJ Watt are both going to do that. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The trading back, if they don't get Aaron Rodgers, I think that door opens. They get Aaron Rodgers, it's gone. There's no, why would you even think about that? But they might, and I think this is a wild situation, but they might play the NFL draft conservatively just to say, we need to figure this out and we need to find a quarterback. I mean, I think you miss out. I definitely think you miss out. I think you have an opportunity to maybe draft a running back, but I also think the possibility that the Steelers play conservative, back up, get a 2nd round pick and find themselves with a not half-hearted, but a lesser defensive tackle at the end of the 1st round, a running back, and then a quarterback that is a massive shot in the dark in the 3rd, could find themselves a year, 2 years from now with the situation where one of those 3 players worked out, where they move back to say one of those 3 players worked out, whereas you're going to get one of those 3 players either way, but at least that one is going to be the 21st pick in the draft, and that guy's going to be pretty good. Now, if Kenneth Grant and everybody else is gone, that opens the door, certainly. And that is a possibility that defensive tackles fly off the board, and you're looking at Darius Alexander at 21 going, that's not worth it. There's no difference between this and moving back. But I do think that playing it conservatively could happen if Rodgers says no. I don't advise it, but Steelers they just feel like at some point they might get a little desperate in this situation and just say, we got to start figuring this out. Mason Rudolph will make you desperate. I get that Mason Rudolph's fine, but the Steelers don't operate at the level of Mason Rudolph. They don't know how to do. You could even look at like, oh, Mason Rudolph was the starter. Mason Rudolph was the starter because the Pittsburgh Steelers were not giving up on the season. They were still trying to win a Super Bowl with the team that clearly could not win a Super Bowl. That is what they were trying to do. And before that, like they thought Mitch Trubisky was a guy, could be a guy. They just don't operate like that. And I think that they will look at it and say, we got to figure it out somehow. And this could be a way. And the Steelers could just shoot themselves in the foot time and time again this offseason. But again, could end up being Aaron Rodgers and, any minute now, any minute, whenever he went. Malibu's 3 hours behind. So it's like 6:30 in the morning there. We're good. We got some time. He's not waking up.
I don't know. He seems like a very high stimulated early in the day type of person, but again, we need to get into that.
Yeah, but at the same time, like high stimulated early in the morning, like spending an hour meditating, which I do all these crazy things too, but like spending an hour meditating, doing some groundwork, you know what I mean? Sniffing the leaves for like, that takes a good couple hours.
Maybe, but at the same time, I could see Aaron Rodgers being a guy that just wakes up and said, I had a dream that I was listening to Renegade in the middle of Acrisure Stadium. Make the call now.
That is a real possibility. That is definitely something that's very true. That is very true. That I mean, I think there's probably a better shot that happens. That's awesome. That's hilarious. All right, let's finish off the show here talking about Cooper Kupp. I know we addressed the wide receiver position yesterday. DK Metcalf was introduced to everybody again but me, and that's okay because I feel good about it. Thanked Russell Wilson for introducing him to his now fiance. Showed off the rock, which made me feel good. Okay, made me feel, as somebody who is married, I was very like, I felt like a jerk because I was like proud of. I was constantly like, yeah, dude, that's a nice ring. You know what I mean? Took me 5 years to save enough money to take a loan out on a ring. Okay, but I was pumped. But the whole time I was just like, dude, you're showing off. Stop it. DK Metcalf showed the whole world. He was like, yo, come here. Look at that thing. Massive. Shout out Pittsburgh Steelers. They just gave me $30 million a year for the next 6 seasons. We're good. So made me feel better there. At the same time, he talked about George Pickens and how they're good. Jerry Dulac drops on the Rich Eisen show right about the same time, maybe an hour or two beforehand, that he believes that the Steelers are going to draft somebody, and that opens the door for George Pickens to be gone probably sometime in the summer. And Cooper Kupp, it's reported that he's looking for anywhere from $12 to $14 million. The Dallas Cowboys and the Seattle Seahawks, who could sign him by the time we're done on this show, could sign him shortly after, are the leading candidates for Cooper Kupp. I'll start by saying I'm not paying Cooper Kupp $14 million if it's just for a season, especially if you're the Steelers and you have to figure out your quarterback position. They don't have that money right now to begin with. That's where this conversation starts, is you could come up with another 10 million, pretty easy. You can't come up with, and that leaves you with about, if you came up with another 10 million, the Steelers would have somewhere around $20 million to spend on a quarterback, which I think is possible. Like, I still think that you could figure out Aaron Rodgers' situation so that figures itself out. And then on top of that, you'd probably have enough restructures and a TJ Watt extension to lower it and add probably another $5-ish million, somewhere in that realm, maybe more. And I think if Cooper Kupp was signing for 8 to 10, I'd be on board with it. 12 to 14 doesn't seem likely. And Dulac saying that he's fairly confident that the Steelers are going to draft a wide receiver, in my head, almost rules Cooper Kupp out of the equation here, because how many wide receivers can you possibly have? They have 6 right now, 5 right now. If they draft somebody, that's 6. They eliminate somebody, that's 5. We haven't even talked about the random people that they're going to sign, May 1st to show up to OTAs and minicamp just to compete for a spot. I don't look at Cooper Kupp as strong of an option today as I did yesterday, because of those two things. You feel any different?
Especially with Jerry Dulac saying that he's confident that the Steelers are going to draft a wide receiver, that almost puts this entire thing to bed. But 12-14 is the extra dirt on top of the grave there. I mean, I just don't see the Steelers spending that much money for Cooper Kupp whenever they do have as much faith as they continue to say that they have in Calvin Austin. I mean, you have two stellar outside wide receivers right now in DK Metcalf and George Pickens. And I understand the conversation that we continue to have day in and day out about George Pickens' future with the Steelers. Let me put it this way. If Pickens was not going into a contract year, this wouldn't be a conversation. There would be no thought of the Pittsburgh Steelers moving on from George Pickens. It is that looming dark cloud of how will Pickens respond if the Steelers choose to not extend him before the season. That's the only reason there is any hesitancy, there's any door opening for a guy like Cooper Kupp to come in. Now, the Steelers currently have 6 because I paired it up in 2. You got the 2 guys that we all love, Benny Sko and Scotty Miller. You got the 2, undersized but still uber talented wide receivers that have a lot in front of them, which is Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson. Then you have the freak shows. You have DK and George, who are on a level of their own. So you have 6 on the roster already. If they're still talking wide receiver in the draft, which we had that conversation 5 minutes ago, where it's you need a defensive lineman, something you haven't addressed in free agency. You might want to go quarterback. You probably need to get another running back to add to Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Warren. Where in the heck are you getting a wide receiver? More so, where are you getting a wide receiver that is going to jump guys like Roman Wilson and Jalen Warren and be enough for you to say, yeah, that they're not going to go after Cooper Kupp because they got this guy. I don't see that happening, because I feel like the Steelers, again, defensive line especially, have other needs that have automatically climbed to the top of the list. So, when it comes to Cooper Kupp, it was something that we were very interested in early, but to me, with the addition of DK Metcalf and the fact that, they do have a lot of faith in Calvin Austin continued, I just don't see a way in which Cooper Kupp, especially at that price, ends up in Pittsburgh anymore.
Exactly. If it was $8 million, okay, you could still see it, because the Steelers would just say, why not? Why wouldn't we add Cooper Kupp? We've been interested in Cooper Kupp for so long. But at that point, you're almost not taking anything away from your salary cap. You could figure it out to the point where it doesn't really affect anything. 14 million, 12 million bucks, like, that's a hit. You've just spent your quarterback money and now have to revamp your quarterback money and figure that out. So at that point, that becomes a signing, like a real roster move. And that's not something that the Pittsburgh Steelers can afford to do right now. On top of that, look at the Steelers and what they need still. They do not have a starting defensive tackle and or nose tackle, however they see Keanu Benton. They do not have a swing tackle. They literally don't have a swing tackle right now. They don't have a backup guard outside of Ryan McCollum and Spencer Anderson. And if that's who you have, great. But what happened to the competition for Mason McCormick? You haven't brought that back yet. There are needs on this team that the Steelers, and that's on top of a quarterback. There are needs on this team that the Steelers still have to evaluate. And again, like, if it was so cheap that you just say, why not? We just have to convince him where his best spot, which they couldn't do right now. But, maybe in some wild fantasy they could. It'd be different. But you're looking at a real roster move that takes away from other roster moves that are necessities for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which means that the easiest route here is to just go number 2 in the NFL draft and hope that everything else works out. Are you nervous? Are you skeptical of DK Metcalf being a number 1 with potentially Calvin Austin being a number 2, which is essentially the same as last year?
Yeah, you're in the same position as last year. So yes, I am concerned about that, mainly because it's the same thing. And we saw the worst case scenario last year, and there's nothing to tell me that I shouldn't be fearful of the worst case scenario happening again next year. Whereas you lose that number 1 guy, what are you left with? Now, Calvin should be better. If Roman is healthy and Roman is who we expect him to be, that should be a better situation. But at the same time, it is a very similar situation where you are lacking a contingency plan if your number one misses for any extended period of time. That does make me nervous. But at the same time, I don't see a world in which Omar Khan can let that happen. I think that last year he learned, don't throw out your number two option unless you have that contingency plan in place. That's why I don't think, that's why I think Jerry Dulac said if George Pickens is going to get traded, it'll be later in the summer because they will have brought that number two in. Now, Dulac thinks it's in the draft. It could be elsewhere, but I do think that they would have to have that number two in that they're confident in before they moved on from anybody in the wide receiver room this year.
So do you see it being, because there's one part of this that you can't control, and that is George Pickens going to play on the last year of his contract? Is he going to be okay playing? And I confidently can sit here and say, I am not sold that he would do that. Does that mean you bring it in beforehand? You make sure that number two's there? Can you get a number two in the fourth round? And if not, do you trade Pickens for a number two? Like, is that how you handle this situation?
See, that's what, again, dark cloud looming over us that I'm fortunate I don't actually have to make the decision on. But since we're just talking about it and there's very low stakes to it, I think that you would, if it comes to the point where George Pickens is saying, I'm not playing without an extension. And if you're the Steelers and saying, well, we don't want to give you an extension, then I'd say, does anybody want to swap? And obviously the Steelers would need to get a number two back, and probably it would be a lesser player. Almost definitely it would be a lesser player. So you'd have to get draft capital back in exchange as well. But they're not trading away George Pickens, whether he's playing or not, without a contingency plan. And that is coming either when he is moved out or beforehand. I don't see a world in which Omar Khan doesn't learn from his mistakes last year and trades away Pickens without knowing or having the contingency plan already in place.
I agree. You whether it's on the trade itself or beforehand, it could be like a minute beforehand. They could trade a third round pick next year for Cortland Sutton, or a fourth or fifth round pick next year for Cortland Sutton, and then 10 minutes later go trade George Pickens for a second round pick in 2026. That could happen as well. I could see that situation, certainly. But I agree with you. It has, it would be wild to walk into next season with the same situation that the Steelers had, but with DK Metcalf instead of George Pickens and Mason Rudolph as your starting quarterback. Wild times. All right. With that said, we're going to finish off the show the same way we do every single day. That's everything on our agenda. So we'll let you guys spark the conversation. We're going to answer all of your questions. Make sure you toss them in the chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can before we head out of here. Nick, what do we got?
Yeah, first, as we always do, a quick shout out to our new members, starting with Panda Games. We also have a couple gifted memberships, with Knock gifting out 5 All Steelers Talk memberships, and our good buddy Carl Spackler gifting out an All Steelers Talk membership today as well.
Thank you guys very much. Very appreciative. I don't know how. Do we know how somebody accepts those gifts?
I've seen people accept them in the comment section. I don't know how you do it.
Okay, that's awesome. As long as they're going to good use. Appreciate you guys. I really, really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
We also have a couple members who are just hitting the 1 month plateau. Shout out to Eddie the First.
Let's go.
Who says, has it been a month already? Here's to many more. I hope Mason gets his shot. Here we go. Forget the Kenny jersey. Give the people a Cole Holcomb jersey.
Eddie, we might have to just give you a Cole Holcomb jersey. I think you deserve it at this point. Shout out. Appreciate you, Eddie the First. Very much so. Appreciate you for sure.
Let's go down to Carl Spackler, who also is celebrating 1 month as a member. Says, happy to celebrate 1 month, fellas. Hashtag Rodgers until Manning.
I think Archie Manning would be the coolest. Like the Steelers, again, like yesterday I went on the rant of we are in Aaron Rodgers' world right now. And we never thought we'd be in Aaron Rodgers' world. Right now, I'll say this. Going from Russell Wilson to Aaron Rodgers to Archie Manning would be like, you're going to look back at it in 30 years and be like, that was awesome.
That was a wild 3 years.
Yeah, I can't believe we got to do that. Like, that was crazy. That's how we'd view it. So you know what? Sometimes it looks like a bad dream, but it's really a blessing every time.
Let's go to Broderick, who says, signing Brandon Eccles versus Nate Hobbs. What are your thoughts?
I think he's extremely or significantly cheaper. I bet you Eccles signs for. I don't know what the details of his contract are, but I'm pretty sure it was like 2 years, $6 million, or 1 year, $3 million, something like that. Small. Here's the other part of this. Eccles is an outside guy who is going to compete. He could play inside, but I don't think the Steelers are done adding to their cornerback room. And I can't share any more than that right now, but I'll say that I don't think the Steelers are done adding to their cornerback room. Brandon Eccles in my head right now, which that could change. It could definitely, they could view him as an inside guy, but just this is my interpretation of things, is an outside guy that will compete with Corey Trice for playing time and will be a quality special teamer because he is a very good special teamer. That's how I view Brandon Eccles right now. Just a guy he's got 3 interceptions over the last 2 years, but last year he played outside. The year before that he played inside. The year before that he played outside. And he said yesterday that he's an outside guy. So I would guess right now he's replacing James Pierre, competing with Corey Trice.
Yeah, two of the guys that people might not know much about that the Steelers brought in and introduced yesterday, very versatile guys. Malik Harrison has played outside and inside at linebacker too, and that's no small thing for the Steelers, who have often needed to mid-season kind of shift focus when it comes to outside linebacker 4. So having a guy with his skill set is, Eccles and Harrison both being able to be guys that can shift from outside to inside, I think is an interesting tiny thread that might need to get pulled on later in the offseason.
Yeah, it saves it's 2 roster spots with 1, and the Steelers need, money right now. So it makes a lot of sense.
Let's go down to James, who says, big respect for the show yesterday. Noah in the Sun says, thank you for what you and Nick do. How do you feel about possibly trading for Hendon Hooker out of Detroit?
Appreciate you for sure. Yesterday was actually a really fun time. So thank you guys. How do I feel about Hendon Hooker? I like Hendon Hooker, but I don't think it depends on price tag. For one, I don't think Hendon Hooker is a starter in the NFL. There's got to be reasons. I don't watch a lot of Hendon Hooker tape. Obviously, I watch Detroit games when they're on television, but I don't sit here and watch Hendon Hooker highlights. There's got to be a reason that the Lions are bringing in backups. Like, they just signed Kyle Allen last night. I don't know if he's going to be the number 2 or the number 3 behind Hendon Hooker, but the year before that, they were 2 weeks away from the playoffs, and they said, we need Teddy Bridgewater here just in case, because he could probably win us a Super Bowl before Hendon Hooker would be able to. There's got to be a reason there. It's got to be a reason for that. I don't know how much development he's had. I don't know if he is a starting quality quarterback in the NFL. I don't know. I don't think I'm sold on the idea of trading for him. If you could get him for like a 6th or 7th round pick, there's a conversation to be had. But there are so many quarterbacks out there that you could look at and say, for a 6th or 7th round pick, you could go make a move and you'd feel comfortable about it. I just don't think the Steelers would view him as a starter.
Let's go to Blessed Light, who says, knowing how the Steelers operate, I would be afraid that if they took a rookie QB in this draft, it would be an excuse to not get one in next year's draft.
It would be. It would exactly be that. But depending on when they get one, if they get one in the 3rd round and next year they'll be able to see, you'll get time, you'll get progress. The Steelers would not. That's the one situation here where you don't have to stress about that as much, is the Steelers would watch that quarterback. And if that quarterback looks like he's the guy, like he's got it, he's just got to develop, they'll know. They have the talent to evaluate that stuff. If he doesn't show those capabilities, they'll draft another guy, because they're not going to. That's the thing, is by next year's draft, at the end of next year's draft, they have to have the guy that's going to be the next shot to be a franchise quarterback. There are no other alternatives. This is, you got to end the veteran quarterback carousel, and you have to have the guy in place to say, here it is. It might work. We hope it does. If it doesn't, we're back to the drawing board, but this is our best shot. And I think they'll spend this season evaluating a rookie to say, okay, he looks like he could be, and we could hold off till like the 2nd or the 3rd round again. But if he doesn't look that way, then, the Steelers will make a move to go get a quarterback.
Let's go down to Egyptian Roughneck, who says, I hate to say it, but Dart, I don't trust. However, I believe Tyler Shock might be our guy. And I did a Madden simulation with Mason Rudolph. He had 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and get this, a first-round playoff win.
I mean, look at, dude, we live and breathe. I live and breathe off of Madden simulations. Okay. I have a blast with them. They're a good time. 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions could possibly be a thing for the Steelers. Like, that's the thing, is you could look at every scenario and it has to end with, and the Steelers go 10-6. You know, like that's what this season's going to be. No matter what, there's one guarantee, and it's that they're going to win more than 8 games. And I don't know how they do it. It's always different, but they'll pull it off. 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions seems like very real to me. Seems like a good spot. Now he's, not going to work out, but I like it. As for Jackson Dart and Tyler Shuck, I think, to be honest with you, I might push back on this one. I think Jackson Dart is a guy that maybe it's the offense that he's in. Maybe it's Lane Kiffin, who I think Lane Kiffin's offense is very transferable to the NFL, which is why I have some pushback on Dart over Tyler Shuck. I also think Tyler Shuck is a name that is going to continue climbing up draft boards, but Tyler Shuck's dealt with injuries. Tyler Shuck took a long time to develop in college football. I don't know what's going to come to him. I don't know if we've reached the ceiling. I don't know where it is. I don't know if we have reached Jackson Dart's ceiling, and that's why he interests me maybe a little bit more than Tyler Shuck does.
And I'll always say this. You're saying the heir apparent, whoever that may be, needs to be drafted to the Steelers roster either this year or next. The heir apparent being drafted as a, third, fourth rounder at 26 years old, that's already fairly dark future if you're the Steelers.
Yeah, with injury issues. I don't know. Like, I think Tyler Shuck's got a really good shot to actually have a successful NFL career, but I do think that there's way more red flags with him than anybody else in this draft.
Not way
maybe
more, but
yeah,
there might be
a good chunk of quarterbacks we've talked about.
Let's go to Potatoes Salad. Says, hope all is well, guys. Haven't been able to catch y'all live in a minute, but since I did and I have you here, should we do a fan tryout for quarterback so the Friar Muth can decide for the team?
First off, hilarious. Second off, that would be awesome. And glad that you're here. Glad that you caught it this morning. Missed you. Fan try. I think I could. I said this before. I think I could throw a football 25 yards. Not accurately, but I can moonball that thing 25 yards. Easy. And if that's all we got to do.
I mean, F it. DK and George are down there somewhere.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I could figure it out, like I could figure it out. I could put it in a place where worst case scenario, it's hitting the ground. And that's, that's all Russ was doing. So I think we're fine.
Let's go to ND Joe. And I haven't read through this entire one, so let's see where this goes. During a blood moon last night, deep in meditation, Myron Cope came to Aaron Rodgers in a vision and presented him a terrible towel in one hand and a Permane Brothers sandwich in the other. My question is, which sandwich did he present him? Because that's important to this entire equation.
The pastrami, dude. Nobody's going to Permane's and getting, like, they are. People do that. But if it's your first time at Permane's and they say, what sandwich do you try? The pastrami. The pastrami sandwich. That's just where you're going. And Aaron Rodgers wouldn't, he'd be like, this is good. This is a classic. Thank you for doing this for me. It was a blood moon last night, actually. And look at Tone Diggs on the Pat McAfee show. I've watched that show every second of it for the last 4 days. And he said it's full moon this weekend. And here we go. Full moon's tonight. I mean, if there's ever a time to make a decision, man, the tides in Malibu are strong right now. And Aaron's out there just embracing the life, man, and just contemplating. I could see it coming.
Let's go to Grayson, who's also been a member for 1 month today. Says, happy Feel Good Friday, boys. Can you imagine all the old guys' reactions if Jameis Winston leads us to our first playoff win in years?
To be honest with you, I could already envision all of the people who would hate Jameis Winston by the end of the season just saying, oh, that guy, man, he's I don't know, but he wins football games. And that would be their reaction. Everybody would it would always start with like, I hate him, but he wins, but the guy wins, dude. And that's how all the old Yinzers would would go. It would be a much better reaction to I have been told by a lot of people that they will not watch a Steelers game when Aaron Rodgers signs with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would guess that number is less with Jameis Winston. So at least I think at this point, like a lot of those people would just be like, well, it's not Aaron. It's not Aaron. And we'll push through it. And then they might fall in love with Jameis Winston. Who knows?
Let's go down to Broderick Wallace, who says, shout out Nick and Noah for an exceptional program. You guys are the best. He's celebrating 1 month of being a member. Let's also go to Smooty Booty, who says, you can tell how good a quarterback will be by how good his name sounds. By the way, I got word that my ship date is April 15th for Navy boot camp.
Shout out, dude. Once again, our entire AST family is rooting you on. So go do your thing, kick some ass. Very excited to hear from you. How can you tell how good a quarterback will be how good
his name sounds?
Their name sounds. Yeah, it's actually very true, dude. Tyler Shuck, it's spelled Shao. What are we even doing here? That's not, you've already messed up. You can't even pronounce your own last name. Like, how did we get here? I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. But at the same time, we said it yesterday, next year's draft is filled with very terrible names at quarterback, like real rough ones. So the Steelers could be in trouble.
I think Kyle McCord is out of his time. If he was drafted in the Phillip Rivers draft, Kyle McCord might have been a generational talent. If we're going by
100%. That was honestly the only reason that Andy Dalton and who else was in his draft class was filled with just very boring, normal names. That Christian Ponder, you know what I mean? Those are just normal quarterback names of just nobody worked out.
Jake Locker, Blaine
Gabbert, dude. That's what I'm saying, dude. It was just quarterback after quarterback that you went, that's a good quarterback name. Terrible. We're moving on. We've got bigger and better names now, like Cam Ward. That's a baller.
Let's go to Egyptian Roughneck again, who says, look, if you're trying out for quarterback, I got your blind side.
Appreciate it. Dude, Egyptian Roughneck, I think you got to go get a job as like a security guard at the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex, because you just never know, dude. You could just be walking around. Mike Tomlin just be like, somebody get him some shoulder pads. Let's see how this thing works. But I appreciate you.
Let's go to Maddie, who says, what do you take away from this entire quarterback debacle? Do you think there was a better way that the Steelers could have gone about it?
To be honest, no, I don't. I don't think that there was a better situation. You could make an argument that they should have paid Justin Fields, but I also learned yesterday, did you know this? Justin Fields' contract has 4 void years in it. They are paying him, it's $40 million on top of 4 years of voided money that is not like considered in that 40 mil. That's nuts, actually. Didn't know that one. So that rules the whole argument out. Before I knew that, my argument could have been maybe you consider paying Justin Fields $30 million. Like maybe. But after that, no, you don't. There is no conversation to be had. I don't think that there's a better way that you could have gone about this. I really, truly, truly do not. I think the Steelers have put themselves in a situation where they just have to eventually make a move for a quarterback in the NFL draft. And I don't think this is the year to do it. I think next year is. And that stinks too, because they just have to wait now and figure it out. But no, I don't think there was a better way to go about it.
Let's go to Michael, who says, my money is on Rodgers retiring right now. Mason QB1, Steelers draft a quarterback in the 3rd round. So who do you then get in the 1st, a running back or a defensive lineman?
I think you got to go defensive tackle in that situation, but I wouldn't be surprised at running back. Here's the thing, though. You have a contingency plan at running back. I like Kenneth Gainwell. I think he's a good number 2 if you need him to just be a 3rd down running back. And then you could get somebody in the 4th or the 5th round that could be an RB3, but maybe like an RB2 if you need to take some workload off of Jaylen Warren. I also think there are running backs still on the market. I mean, every day that passes, Nick Chubb's got to get cheaper, right? And you could look that direction if you need to. But I would guess defensive tackle is still their 1st round pick.
Let's go to Panda Games, who says, Noah, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Mason use the middle of the field?
He did.
He's also
He
not
did.
5'11".
He's also not 5'11". Nah. Look if Russ gets signed to the Steelers, coaches might not be the only person that it isn't super strong with, but I'm 5'8". Okay. I did not look up to Russell Wilson. There was no looking. It wasn't even a slight like nothing. It was, if anything, it was a little bit, just a little bit. So 5'11", generous. Middle of the field, yes. Mason Rudolph did use the middle of the field. Not a ton, but he played in the Matt Canada offense. I personally think I just think if you got somebody who could listen to what Arthur Smith tells you to do, you can succeed to some degree in the Arthur Smith offense. It worked for Justin Fields, and it was a dumbed down version of the Arthur Smith offense. It was just you got the starting job on Friday afternoon. Like this is what we have to do right now. If you give him a whole summer to formulate something for a Mason Rudolph, I'm telling you, I think Mason could look pretty okay. Not good, pretty okay.
Let's go to Tyler Zimmerman, who says, "Happy Friday, boys. What did Justin do so wrong to get moved out of town realistically?"
Be good enough to warrant $30 million guaranteed and 4 void years. That's what.
I think it's what did he do right to get $40 million.
Yeah. Justin was just too good to stay in Pittsburgh. That's exactly what it was. The Steelers were not willing to pay him that type of contract. And to be honest with you, again, the void years, which I don't even know how that works. I'm not a cap guru. I can't tell you how you add void years and not have to report. I just don't know. Ben's the only guy I've ever seen with void years. He's the only one. And all I knew is that they paid him for 3 years after he retired. And that was because his cap number needed to be lower for them not to suck his last 2 years. With this one, it's just the Steelers weren't going to match that contract. And it's hard to blame them for not wanting to match that contract.
Let's go to Pittsburgh Hornets, who says, "Noah, do you still think the Steelers double dip at defensive line with the first 2 picks? And what is your current draft projection for the first 2 picks?"
No, I think that ship has sailed once the second round pick got moved. And to be honest, I think that ship sailed because after the combine, I think my second round pick in the combine draft was the post combine draft was running back. Right now, my first 2 picks for the Steelers are a defensive tackle and a quarterback. That is and this is a guess. This is a prediction. This is not what I'm hearing. If I had to predict, defensive tackle and a quarterback.
Let's go down to Egyptian Roughneck again, who says, "After going through the film and the stats, Arthur Smith had Ryan Tannehill use the middle of the field 49.7% of the time. Maybe Mason can boost that up more."
I think he could. Okay, let's look at the grand scheme of what the Steelers are doing right now. They're boosting their running game. Okay, Kyle Juszczyk is most likely going to sign in Pittsburgh. He's a fullback, but he's also a tight end / a pass catcher. He could do everything. That's going to boost the middle of the field. That's going to boost the running game. That's going to boost the play action. That's going to allow the Pittsburgh Steelers to do a lot more things. You're finally going to utilize Pat Freiermuth, who was the plan to be utilized last year, but Russell Wilson was your quarterback. And even the Steelers tried to deny that Russell Wilson does not use the middle of the field. It did. Obviously, they were proven wrong like the rest of us, or like me at least. But that's what their plan was. This year, you get Mason Rudolph to just utilize the middle of the field. Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, put George Pickens in the slot and send him deep. Put DK Metcalf in the slot and send him deep. You start doing those things, you open up so much more. I really do. I think that I think any quarterback that came to Pittsburgh this year outside of Russell Wilson would utilize the middle of the field way more than they have in the last 3-4 years.
We got a couple more to get to here, starting with Lance Allen, who says, "I've seen GP trade rumors. Real or fake?"
Real. Yeah, definitely real. I don't know how active they are. I have not heard anything of George Pickens recently outside of other reporters talking about him, but the sense remains the same that it's hard to imagine the Pittsburgh Steelers keeping George Pickens this season. I don't know that it's a certainty that he's gone, but you look at it and you say, they've dealt with a lot of nonsense the last 3 years. They've added their wide receiver 1. They've paid their wide receiver 1. They're not going to pay George Pickens. It doesn't feel like it's a situation where it's like, hey, George, play one more year with Mason Rudolph at quarterback. Things will be okay. And then you could just go into free agency. I don't think George or anybody else is going to want to do that.
Let's go to Grayson, who says, I don't remember if I asked earlier on the show or not, but I need some predictions here. What are your stat predictions for Rodgers and Winston, if you have any, in March?
I think Rodgers, the first one, would be throwing under 500 times for the first time in, I think, 7 years in the NFL, 6 years maybe in the NFL. I don't know. I think Rodgers is very moderate, 28 touchdowns and, 10 interceptions, something like that. Jameis Winston, 24 touchdowns and 18 interceptions, like something like that. I think both of them would be pretty mid-tier, except for the interceptions for Winston in that ballpark. And I think the biggest one for Rodgers is that he would throw the football significantly less than he has in a long time.
And let's finish it off with Taylor, who says, not sure if you've mentioned this already, but do you have any sense of how much cap space the Steelers have left? Surprising that we can even afford Rodgers after spending on some of these other guys. I
believe the Steelers have about $20 million. Can you look that up on Over the Cap? I believe the Steelers have about $20 million left. The way they'd have to sign Rodgers is they'd either have to create more cap space or they'd have to push his contract back, which is like, that's a possibility. You could guarantee Aaron Rodgers $20 million this season and situate it to where his cap hit is like 25-30 million bucks. And then next year it's bigger. And then, still give him his 80 million over 2 years. It's just pushed back to where you have to figure it out next year, because that's the thing about salary cap is you don't have to figure out next year until next year. And you could just keep pushing it back. Do we have an exact number?
As of right now, Over the Cap has the Steelers with $46 million in cap space.
Yeah, that doesn't include DK probably. I would imagine.
It does include DK. He's on there as 5th highest paid Steeler right now.
Oh, it doesn't really? Okay. Yeah. $46 million in available cap space. All right, so you'll cut a little bit off of that for Mason Rudolph. You'll take about $10 million off for draft picks. So you're looking at about $30 million. I guess I was off by about $10 million there. Unless they're missing somebody, and they might be, but I guess $30 million, which again, like, you're going to have to sign some people. So it is possible. Oh, is Darius Slay on there? That's the one that just got announced yesterday. He is on there.
Let me look. I'm looking it up now. I just closed it out.
Yeah, I was going to say, because Darius Slay might be the guy that isn't. But if there isn't, then I could be way off. But
no, there's no Darius Slay. So there's $10 million off.
There's $10 million. I was going to say I'm pretty certain I had them at about 20. But yeah, maybe 25, which is a good boost. But they'd have to maneuver some cap space into next season to make that work.
That's a wrap for today then.
Awesome. With that said, guys, we are heading out of here. Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. And as always, find all of our work at si.com/NFL/Steelers. We continue Aaron Rodgers watch. I mean, I could be back on here anytime in the next 3 days, bringing anything I could to you guys about Aaron Rodgers and what this is. So I will try to keep you guys updated. I will try to provide updates throughout the weekend as much as possible. You can also find all of the continuous updates on si.com/NFL/Steelers. With that said, everybody enjoy a beautiful weekend in the Berg. We'll be back on Monday. Peace.